Hello, 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 everybody. I am Rob Appel from Michael Miller Fabrics. Welcome back to another wonderful episode here at Making It Fun. We've got a super easy tutorial for you today, and I can't take any of the credit. That's right, my dear friend Charisma Horton. You've met her. She's one of our fabulous brand ambassadors for Michael Miller Fabrics. Created a super cool pattern. It's called the Freedom Quilt, and I thought it'd be super appropriate right now with Memorial Day coming up. And I thought you might enjoy the way she puts together these super easy hourglass blocks that form the star. So if you're brand new to machine quilting, but if you're brand new to quilting in general, yes, we are doing machine piecing. And yes, I am caffeinated. And if you're new to the show, I'm always caffeinated, so it's just how I roll. At any rate, I was going to say this is a really fun concept, but it's technically a 9-patch project, and her quilt is very fat quarter and very scrappy friendly, and it's super cool the way you can rearrange all the colors, but focusing on a nice neutral background, a solid like a cream, a gray, or a bright white. And again, I mixed up the red, white, and the blue because I wanted to be patriotic. I wanted to celebrate the Memorial Day holiday coming up, and I thought this would be another great way for us all to do it. I am using the Cotton Couture from Michael Miller. It's one of our high density solids, and when I say high density, I mean it's got a higher or a tighter weave, a finer thread. It's just got a beautiful hand on it, and it's just fantastic for all kinds of sewing and quilting projects, of course. So anyways, we're going to follow Charisma's pattern, and Charisma's pattern is one of those patterns that you should be purchasing either from her or one of your local quilt shops. So I'm going to be a little vague about the instructions and just walk you through the design, assuming you already have the pattern. So I'm just going to be your teacher in the front of the classroom today. And this is one of the blocks, and you can make many of these to make an incredible quilt, as you can see here. This photograph here is Susan Emery's quilt. Susan Emery is our brand manager at Michael Miller Fabrics, and she was using a bunch of the other colors of the Cotton Couture as well. So anyways, we are all very inspired by this project. Thanks again, Charisma. Let's dive in. So for today, in our vague instructions, you're going to need 3 sizes. You're going to need large, you're going to need medium, and you're going to need small sized squares. They're going to be super easy, and I'm going to focus on, I'm going to call this the neutral as we get ready to build our hourglasses. And I've already taken, and hopefully you can see, I've drawn a line across the diagonal of the square, and I just used a fine tip Sharpie marker, and I placed a ruler across here like this, and I used the fine tip because it draws a nice little line, and that's going to be a guideline for sewing. Now, you're going to need twice as many of these neutrals. Now, her projects are a little bit more scrappy. I'm putting it together in a more focused group so you can follow the design a little easier here. And so basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 2 of these neutral colors, and I'm going to add 1 to my dark blue here, my medium blue, dark is in the center. And then I'm going to add another 1 to one of these white squares. And of course, these are all the same size. From here, we're going to go ahead and come over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to use this as a stitch line. So my presser foot, that seam allowance for the 1/4-inch seam, is going to come down on the drawn line, because we're going to make what becomes 2 half-square triangles out of this. You've seen me do it a million times here. So I just like to sew through one side, and you can either rotate here, or I have found that chain piecing these, because you're going to do lots and lots and lots of these. That's the other cool idea behind this pattern, is it is very scrappy, so you can just kind of load up your squares and make a bunch of combinations. I found when chain piecing the squares, though, it was much easier to cut them all apart after the first round. Come back in, line up on that seam allowance, make sure you know where you're at there. And let's go ahead and sew on the other side to form that second half square triangle. Now, let's use a ruler to protect our hands, but we're simply going to cut now that drawn line that was our sewing guide. And now with those both cut, what I want to do is I want to come over here and I want to press to the neutral, whether I'm using the white or the blue in my pattern. So I'm pressing to this medium blue right now. And that's going to really help in our next step as we get ready to nest our seams in. And I just absolutely love the way this comes together. So I'm really excited to share this with you. So watch, what we're going to do now is we're going to take one of our units here that has the blue and the neutral, and then the other one that has the white and the neutral, and all I need to do is make sure that the neutrals are on opposite sides, and then as I lay these together, those seam allowances are touching each other inside. So this line right here, I kind of give it the old wiggle, whole thing like this, okay? And then once that is set in there nice, or maybe you wanted to do this before, it doesn't matter which order you do these steps in, but we do need to draw one more line. So take one of your sets of fabrics, draw one more line. We're going to do the same technique. So this again will be a cut line. And then it's a great idea to double check if you've never done this before. So remember, you're going to be thinking about this. You would have stitched along this line here, fold it back like you would just cut it, and make sure that you're now looking at that hourglass you're after. That's what I did in my prep work. I loved the technique. I couldn't believe it was going to work, but of course it did over and over again. So now right back over to the machine, we're going to do the exact same thing where we're going to sew down both sides of that drawn line with our 1/4 inch seam allowance. And as always, I'm a junkie for efficiency when possible, so I'm going to make sure everything stayed nice as I grab that, but I am going to go ahead and chain piece these as well. Do be careful of that folded seam underneath there, just like I was showing you earlier. It might start to get hung up on something, so just make sure you've got a nice, accurate grip on it. Same thing, we come back on over here, use the ruler to protect your hands. And now we're going to want to press these before we trim these. And on these ones, I just got into the habit in pressing to the fabrics that had the darker of the sides. These squares will be joined to solid pieces next, so there won't be any more patchwork, so we're not as worried about the bulk management. So again, if you're new to quilting and you're like, why is he so concerned about all this pressing? Well, the pressing is kind of what helps the seams stay nice and accurate and makes our patchwork just to look a little bit better. Again, am I concerned about precision in my patchwork? No, not at all. But I do like it to look good if I'm going to spend the time cutting and sewing it all back together. And speaking of looking good, check that out. As I bring that back over to the center, those turned out pretty dang sharp. And the reason that those points lined up so nicely, it's because I did line up those center seams, okay? Now, these are going to be trimmed down to a square size, and the way I do that is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to find a diagonal on the ruler, and that same diagonal, oh, that's right, and I like to make sure I was doing this, so I just set like one dark color down below so I could see it on my rotation. And I'm just going to now move this here so that my diagonal, and I want you to look in here nice and close, hopefully there's not too much glare from above. But this diagonal line is running through one seam, but I can also see the points. If I slide this down just a freckle, I can also see the points this way, which means that my square is squared to the ruler and the diagonal. So I can come in here and I can trim down here like this and like this. You would do the same thing if you were making half square triangles. Then I'm going to rotate it 180 degrees. I'm going to find that marker. Okay, so there's that. So those are going to be trimmed down. I'm going to do that to all of these pieces, set them aside, and then I get into the next step because I just like to do things step after step after step. And now we're going to start to build out what is our 9 patch. So let's start by taking one of these dark blue center squares, and then what we really need to focus on is that our medium blue is going to touch that on all 4 sides, just like that. Now we also had, so earlier we used our medium white squares, we also had some small white squares built. You'll need 4 of those small white squares for every one of our 9 patches. There's your layout like that. And now what I want to do is I'm just going to kind of separate these, and I'm going to focus on the blue first, and I'm going to lay these over, and when I come to the sewing machine, I'm going to really make sure I always have the solid fabric on the underside against those feed dogs. It gives me the opportunity to control my seams on the top side of the fabric. I'm also, because these are very small little blocks, going to take the time to come back over, and I'm going to press these now into the, center here. So I'm pressing into the solid piece of fabric away from the patchwork. I'm going to grab the other piece, I'm going to rotate it, and all I have to do is just continually double check that that blue fabric my eye is keyed into now is always touching my center fabric. That's why I chose the 3 shades of blue, other than the patriotism, of course, for our demo today. And on this opposite side, I'm going to do the same thing I did to the other, is I'm going to start by laying my iron on the patchwork itself, pushing the fabric or the seam into the solid. It's going to make everything easier with these smaller patchwork pieces. Okay, so as I've done that, now as I come over to the white pieces, I do not want to sew to that blue. I just want to sew to these blue-gray shades, my light blue that we're using today. And we're going to make these. Same exact technique. Press after each time. But because we're doing multiple colors now, you can technically chain piece and do one side of each before we leave our machine and head on over to the iron. At this point, I know I'm pressing into my lightest fabric, and I might get a little bit of that seam to show through, but it's truly going to make my life much easier in the physical patchwork later. And there's just certain, well, I'm a parent of teenagers. We say, choose your battles, right? So at any rate, making sure I have the white sew into the blue-gray on each side as I come back over to the machine. We're going to finish off these rows now. You may also notice I normally always sew with the bulk of my fabric on the feed dogs, but because of these little seams that are in here on these little blocks, I do prefer to flip these over so I can always see the patchwork on top of the solid fabrics. A little different than I've been teaching you over the last few videos. Pressing into the solid fabric again. Laying my work on the table, new piece up in the air. And now as I come back into the rows, we just need to make sure that we're going to focus on sewing these blues back together. And the reason I was concerned about that seam pressing is this is what we call nesting. So these seams now on the bottom side are facing opposite directions, which is going to make life a little easier. And so for me here, I'm going to choose this orientation because now I have 2 of my 3 patchworks facing up. Coming through, taking my time, making sure I know where all of the little patchwork seams are. And again, due to the size of the work we're working with right now, I want to come back on over to the ironing board. I'm going to press. Make sure I have everything correct and finish out this seam. For every one block you want to make, you're going to need to make 4 of these wonderful little 9-patch stars using Charisma's awesome little hourglass method. Then, once you have a full stack, well, at least 4 of these really cool star blocks for each of the blocks for the rest of the project, right? 1, 2, 3, and 4. Then we're going to need 5 of your red or your background pieces here. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to lay this out like a checkerboard, basically, with one of the red solids in the center here. So we're going to do here, here, like yay. And then just like we did when we were building up our earlier smaller 9 patches as the stars, let's just go ahead and join these edge by edge as we go over to the machine. And again, I'm going to be flipping these just so that it's a little bit easier for me to manage my seams. So right now, yep, I'm going to have that solid down on the bottom. And with these larger blocks, and because there won't be any color confusion, what I can really do now is know where I was, grab this other side here, and yes, I usually will build it with as much of the weight as possible on the feed dogs, but something like this right now, I am going to take the time, just go ahead and just flip this over, so the work is now up on top again, and we're going to put that solid down, just so that it's on the feed dogs nice and easy. I can manage these seams as we go through, and build out the rest of this larger, technically what is considered to be a 9 patch. To prevent the bleed off of the color, now I do want to press into the solids because I've got all that white over there, and the fabric's larger. It's easier to manipulate this time than it was in the smaller pieces when we pressed into the solid fabric. So there's often a little bit of rhyme or reason going on up here, and folks that are new to quilt making, that just comes from years and years of experience in finding what I like as my own personal pressing or piecing habits, that kind of a thing. So we're just going to keep on building our blocks like that. Just take one more moment, make sure you have everything in the proper orientation. And now we're just going to join these rows. And like I said, those seams between the solids and the patchwork are going to nest ever so nicely. And that really helps us stay accurate as we go across. This time you're going to have some seams up, some seams down. You'll be just fine. One of the little tricks I do, however, is sometimes when you have the seams on the underside, like we do right now, those seams want to get caught up like on this gap on my presser foot, or excuse me, on my stitch plate table. So you often see me kind of lifting or pulling up on the fabric like that. What that's doing is allowing any of these seams that might be facing in towards the foot, the feed system, any of that, it kind of gives them up a little bit of a lift, a little bit of a pull. So I just lift up and over that, and now as I hold that down with my finger keeps that running nice and smoothly. Same thing here. Your blocks are all large enough now that we can do a majority of the work per block at the machine before we go back over to the ironing board. So again, just nest up those blocks where they match, those seam allowances where those blocks match in. Oh, let's take a moment and have a look. Let's hit it with the iron before I show you what it looks like, right? Super fun, super easy, really easy to do. And when I was prepping out all the little parts and pieces for the video, it hardly took any time at all based on this construction. So I really love this pattern. Thanks again to Charisma Horton. Please, everybody, check out her work. She's got an awesome website, great following out there, and she does amazing quilts. This is another example of one of her awesome, awesome blocks. This one, of course, features the amazing Cotton Couture, our high-density solid from Michael Miller Fabrics. And also, I thought it would be another great way to celebrate our patriotism with the holiday that is coming up. So again, thank you for being here at Making It Fun today. I certainly hope you enjoyed this quick little tutorial. Give Charisma some love, and we will see you all in another video real soon. I'm glad to see you're still there. Hey, if you insist on spending all day on YouTube, great with me. Please check out a few of my other videos. I think they're fantastic. Hit that subscribe button, hit the bell to be notified. We'll see you next time for another helping of fun.